Welcome to the MMA Roundup with your host, Randy Silver. We break down the biggest sports stories and news from our favorite sport, MMA. Today, we have your breakup and history explained for UFC versus USADA. You may hear this in the news. USADA and UFC are no longer going to be in partnership starting January 1st, 2024. So we're going to break down what is UFC. Obviously, you know what that is, MMA organization. What is USADA? How have they been working together? How did we get to this point? And what's the history of UFC and USADA together? And where does USADA play a part in other sports besides MMA and UFC? We have a whole dialogue, slideshow, quotes, videos, and more for you. So let's dive into it. It all starts and ends kind of with Conor McGregor. Go figure, dude. Go figure. It's always Conor, right? Well, so you got Conor on the left. UFC, USADA, anti-doping in the middle. USADA stands for United States Anti-Doping Agency. And on the right, you have the CEO of USADA, Travis Tygart. He's been the CEO since 2007. He's best known for exposing Lance Armstrong, the bicyclist, for his doping operation. If you remember Lance, he said for years he never doped. He won multiple Tour de France's. And finally, he got caught for doping and had to come clean. So how does Conor McGregor play a part? Well, we're going to get to that. So that's going to be our conclusion, but we're going to talk about it a little bit right here. Tiger came out and said the relationship between USADA and UFC is unattainable given the statements made by UFC leaders and others questioning USADA's principled stance that McGregor should not be allowed to fight without being in the testing pool for at least 6 months. To be in USADA, you have to have 2 negative tests and be in the testing pool for 6 months. If you do both of those, you're now eligible to be able to fight again. If you remember Conor McGregor, you remember Conor McGregor, he last broke his leg. His last time he fought was when he broke his leg against Poirier. It's been about 2 years since he fought. And there was talks about him fighting before he entered USADA pool. There were talks about him fighting once he entered USADA pool before the 6 months. And that created the friction between UFC and USADA. Other things have happened that we're going to dive into. But long story short, USADA has said, our public instance, the 6-month rule applied to all athletes, including Conor McGregor. He must be in place, and it's led UFC brass to be happy. And they're like, doses, USADA, we don't want to be with you all anymore. They want to have more influence, and they want to have the rules. So, boom. That is where they're like saying, we don't want to be with USADA anymore because McGregor can earn over $100 million in his return fight. Tiger said also there was never any negotiations, and their renewal of their contract was out at the end of the 2023 year. A lot of he said, she said here type of stuff. A lot of dirt throwing from one way to the other, as Dana White would say, and we'll talk about that in a second. Tiger felt like UFC would not honor the requirement of the 6-month McGregor. And they said that because of stuff that Dana White said, stuff that potentially Joe Rogan said. And USADA was not going to bend the rules because they have to have the rules in place to make it fair. Dirty move. Dana White issued his first statement after the split was announced a couple days ago. He went on the Pat McAfee show and said, let me start with this. It wasn't announced by the UFC. It was a dirty move by USADA. There was no announcement yesterday. That was scumbagism. What happened? And what will happen, UFC will address it. Not by me. UFC's drug czar, Jeff Novitzky, and their lawyer, Hunter Campbell, will handle all of it, and we'll let you know all about it. So who is Jeff Novitzky? You may have never heard this guy before. He is a key player in the UFC. He's a key player in the overall anti-doping scene for the past 20, 30 years, and we're going to tell you all about him. So at this press conference that happened, this was yesterday, we're taping this Friday, October 13th, spooky. On October 12th, they had a press conference where they talked about UFC with USADA, what they're going to be doing next, and everything in between. Campbell and Jeff Novitzky said that UFC will now use drug-free sport to collect drug test samples beginning next year, and the UFC's anti-doping program will be led by former FBI agent George Piro as an independent administrator. So that's one. So how are they going to be able to continue to move forward without USADA? And two, what is going to actually happen next with their grievance against USADA? At the New conference on Thursday, the university called Tiger's statement bull S. Campbell said the statement was complete misrepresentation and couldn't be farther from the truth. Campbell said he maintained to Tiger for months that McGregor would spend 6 months in the drug testing pool before competing again and did not care if McGregor had to take 37 tests to prove he was clean. Campbell said what USADA did to McGregor was disgusting, could be legal liability. Why? He basically said McGregor was going to cheat the system. He's kind of on roids. He's going to cheat the system, get back in the fight. That is slander. And if that's not true, then you have legal liability because it ruins his potential earnings, his reputation, endorsements, etc., and that is not square. We saw, just taking the politics for a second, Fox News talked about election fraud and it ended up not being true. And the company who was running the voting ballots was able to sue Fox News and won close to $1 billion. I would say $750 million. And that was defamation. Same type of concept here. I'm not bringing politics in here, but that's the concept is when you say something out there that hurts someone's ability to succeed in their business, hurts their reputation, their ability to make money, that can become a court case and you can get money back for defamation. In a three-page letter sent to USADA on Thursday from UFC's outside counsel, they claimed defamation and they said there could be a chance for suing. They also said for McGregor, he's 10% of the pool, conduct himself with integrity and honesty, he's done everything right. He's very upset with what was said. As I briefly mentioned, UFC announces partnership with Drug Free Sport International for testing. They will replace USADA starting January 1st. So now that McGregor's back in USADA pool, this means he will be tested for October, November, December, or get tested, but he'll be in there for 3 months. And then hypothetically, January 1st, there could be a fight and McGregor could fight if that's what Sport International and UFC agree upon, because USADA will be gone. So let's kind of dive into USADA a bit and the backing of how they became to work with the UFC. USADA stands for United States Anti-Doping Agency. Their mission, preserve the integrity of competition, inspire true sport, and protect the rights of athletes. And they do this through education, which is helping fighters understand what to take, how they can take it, what they can't take. They have testing, so obviously what we just talked about, testing athletes. Science, how can they make sure that what they're being taken is helping their bodies, what's good, what's bad. Results management, the testing results, and once you get the results back, what you do, and of course, getting people who are now suspended for test, now they have to work their way back in the system. USADA began operating October 1st, 2000 as an independent, nonprofit, non-governmental agency whose sole mission is to preserve the integrity of competition, inspire the true sport, and protect rights of athletes. USADA also really came back from, in baseball, they had the whole doping scandal. USADA was something that the government helped set up a bit to be able to have a fair, independent regulation and independent commission to help try to weed this out. Starting in 2015, USADA became the official drug testers of the UFC as an independent anti-doping agency. USADA also does Olympics, Paralympics, Pan American Games for the United States. Small text, long story short, over the years, more than $12 million have been allocated by USADA for cutting-edge scientific research aimed at understanding and effective combating the use of performance-enhancing drugs. USADA has collected and managed the results of more than 100,000 anti-doping tests using different ways to get it done. So they're a leader in anti-doping agencies and being able to test results, education, and more. USADA provides athletes tools in medication, whereabouts, supplement contact, how to be clean, and much more to prepare them for being an athlete. Here's their website so you can see some of the stuff that they have if you're an athlete, what you can click into, and who they work with. So why did the UFC start working with USADA? there were multiple high-profile cases of UFC athletes getting caught with steroids, and they had to do something to legitimize the sport and make it on a fair playing field. If you look at athletes today versus athletes back in the early days of UFC, you can see the body's different. Yes, their weight classes were a bit different. UFC is now more well-rounded with flyweight, bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight was kind of the smallest back then at 155, and you went up. So there were bigger people back then. But you also can just tell a body who is on steroids and not. It does not look natural. And a lot of those athletes back then were yoked. These athletes now are yoked, but they were yoked. Chael Sonnen, case number one. He fought Anderson Silva at UFC 117 in Oakland, California. It's one of the all-time fights. Sonnen was beating Anderson Silva for 4 rounds. In the 5th round, he looked like he was going to win the middleweight belt. Anderson Silva caught Sonnen in a choke, choked him out. Silva wins. It went wild. It was an amazing match. After the match, Sonnen got drug tested and revealed an abnormally high testosterone to estrogen level, indicator of steroid use. A second test showed similar results. Suspended. So that made shockwaves as one of the biggest fighters in UFC, almost champion, getting caught. And Anderson Silva himself got caught a couple years later. He had to serve a 12-month suspension, pay a $160,000 fine. He was taking a sexual stimulant, but it was disallowed. That's what he said. This was kind of the start, the end of his career. Once he came back, he was never the same fighter. But this also tarnished his legacy to a degree. He got caught doping. This was in 2015. And that's when the UFC was like, hey, these 2 instances, there are others that we're just not talking about for time use. We have to regulate this. We have to find a way to weed this out because this is really the integrity of the sport. So in February 2015, top executives from the Ultimate Fighting held a media conference at the Red Rock Casino Resort and Spa in Las Vegas, and they announced that USADA, as we just talked about, would become the first anti-doping testing agency and handle all of UFC's new anti-doping efforts. For the first time ever, a MMA organization would be subjecting its athletes to a testing program as stringent as the one the Olympics would go through. And this is where Dana White hired Jeff Novitzky as the drug czar, overseeing everything for UFC. Dana White was the one doing it as UFC president up until that point and dealing with it. Jeff would now come in and take care of everything needed. Jeff is a badass. One more time. Jeff is a badass. If you don't know who he is, there's no reason that you know who he is because he plays behind the scenes. He worked in the government for a long time. The UFC hired him from being for the government. He worked helping bring down this. What is this? That's Dana White. That's Jeff right there. Excuse me, Dana White. That's Barry Bonds. And that's Jeff right there. Why is Barry Bonds known? For the whole Balco. What is Balco? Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative. They were the big players in the MLB scandal for steroids. He helped raid the offices in 2003 with the U.S. government, and they caught a lot of players in MLB. You remember those trials with Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, Barry Bonds, Rafael Palmeiro. That was all related to Balco. He helped bring down everything like that. So he was an expert and is an expert in drug testing. UFC in 2015 brought him over to lead the UFC drug testing scheme. So since then, he's been the guy dealing with drug testing, dealing with USADA, and being he's not even the face of the franchise, being the head of that department for the UFC, while Dana White took that away. If you got caught with testing and you got a failed test, you could be facing up to 2 to 4 year suspension. However, not everybody was stoked with USADA coming in. There was definitely some negative connotations around USADA. Who's in charge? They're suspicious. Can we trust what they're doing? So Novitzky had to come in and get UFC fighters to understand the purpose of the program, the use of the program, the benefits of the program, because not everyone bought into the program, which is fair. So first it starts with education. When the program started, not everybody was tested right away. The early months of the program was spent with UFC educating its athletes about PEDs and what they could expect from the program. why PEDs aren't good, and how it could affect them if they got caught. So they would go to different MMA gyms and travel around to tell people what was happening. Once it started going, and you see again, CEO Travis Tiger was right there, start with education. Once education is in place, then you can start testing. This is when it started popping up. So Johnny Hendricks, an MMA legend, USADA showed up on the random drug test last night. This was posted tweets January 14, 2006. According to USADA's testing database, 55 were selected for a total of 81 tests in the third quarter of 2015 when it really got going. In the fourth quarter, that number jumped up to 131 athletes and 272 tests. And people would show up 6 a.m. to test. They showed up at your gym, training to finish, while people were weight cutting. If they talked on social media, they posted a photo, something looked suspicious, boom, next day USADA would be right there. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is why UFC was not happy, was how USADA would find athletes and make them do testing. Some big people that got caught with steroids via USADA, Mikro Krokop and Gilson Tobo. They both were suspended after admitting using steroids. In Tobo's case, he used HGH. Just not cool. Again, cheating the game right there. So now we can see when the UFC and USADA started doing testing, how it ramped up. In quarter 3, 2015, we said 81, total for the year 353, and that jumped up significantly in 2016, 2,200 tests, 2,800 tests in 2017. And in competition, out of competition is just, I'm training for a fight, I'm going to go to your door 3 months before the fight and check it. Are you taking steroids or you're not? In competition, leading up to the fight, week of, after the fight, making sure you're clean that fight week. We can see it's really ramping up 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, 2022, 2023. Here are the results of the testing. 4,300 tests. And again, that's all UFC athletes. Now the question is, what are the results of these actual testing? Are athletes getting caught? Are they staying clean? And you're going to be very surprised. Some high-name, high-caliber athletes got caught. So starting in 2016, we look here. We're going to show you Yoel Romero got caught, 6 months suspension. Keep going up the list from bottom to top. Nate Diaz, caught. He got a public warning. Brock Lesnar, caught. 1 year suspension, and he never really came back to the UFC after that. This was after he lost, never came back. You keep going. Kevin Gastelum, caught. 6 months suspension. And they're telling you what they got caught for. THC. So basically, he got caught with weed, which sucks that you can't do it. It's a little bit more relaxed nowadays. You keep going up. Cynthia Cavillo was a big name. Josh Barnett, MMA legend, public reprimand. Nick Diaz, 3 whereabout failures, 1 year suspension. Meaning, he was supposed to get tested. He hid, didn't take the test. 3 times, you're suspended because we can't test you. Other athletes got caught. So now we're in 2018. John Jones. This was a big one. 15-month suspension, and he lost that fight because of it. Nowadays, the amount he got caught with of the chlorine substituted is below the threshold of what would be considered suspension. So technically, he would not have been suspension if that test happened today, which people say means that they should rescind that suspension and he should get the record back. Other names you can see on TJ Dillashaw. This was massive as well in 2019. He got a 2-year suspension, and he hands up. I was taking steroids, my fault. Sean O'Malley, your current bantamweight champion, he got caught, 6 month suspension. Paulo Costa, 6 month suspension. So you can see here, a lot of big names have been caught in this program. And finally, going to the last part here. Yair Rodriguez, 3 times they couldn't find him, 6 month suspension. Gilbert Mendez, 2-year suspension. Gastelum again. Yeah, just tough. Very, very tough. So one case again of UFC and its athletes not being happy about how the drug testing is done. UFC 278, Paulo Costa is fighting Luke Rockhold in Salt Lake City. If Costa wins this, he most likely will be in the middleweight contender to get the next title fight. And you know what happens? The USADA sent their agents at 6 a.m. this morning when he was sleeping to do a blood test for the USADA testing. He was cutting weight. He was dehydrated. And they took his blood. That's not smart. A fighter could be lightheaded. could pass out, could have a lot of implications with someone who's weight cutting, dehydrated, taking their blood, and doing it at 6 a.m. of basically weighing in. This did not make Dana White and the brass happy, and things like this, other stories, are why UFC was pissed about USADA and kind of led to them being, hey, we don't want to work with you anymore. And that takes us to Conor McGregor. He broke his leg. He has not fought since this fight with Dustin Poirier. And there's been a lot of rumors out there that Conor McGregor is on steroids. Look at his photo here. 1, 2, 3. You can tell he's got bigger for sure. I mean, look at those quads. Whew. Is that natural? Is it not natural? Is he taking stuff? He went on The Ultimate Fighter with Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler, and they were supposed to fight right after. All the coaches after The Ultimate Fighter usually fight very short athlete. McGregor then went on The Ultimate Fighter with Chandler. They were supposed to fight shortly after. However, McGregor was not in USADA pool. As a result, he was not allowed to fight, and he kept saying, I want to come back, I want to come back. December is back on the table. And then McGregor said, they will not let me fight in December, ladies and gentlemen. And that's because of USADA. He was not in the testing pool and will not be 6 months. Now, of course, for UFC, they want him at the big pay-per-views, more and more money. Look at the gate. His long-awaited debut will be a money breaker for them. Now, USADA won't have UFC. They had already signed a deal with the PFL, Professional Fighters League, to be their official testers. So now they will only have PFL for testing in MMA. UFC is gone. USADA and anti-doping program is no longer together, and hopefully this gives you an idea of how we got to this point and the breakup in history explained of UFC and USADA. So currently, Conor McGregor is back in the testing pool. He needs to be there for 6 months with USADA. He'll be there for 3 months starting January 1st, 2024. USADA is gone, and UFC will have the new testing partners. Now the question is, will they still abide by the 6-month rule, or will they make it so McGregor will fight before the 6 months? Comment your thoughts. Do you think this is good for the UFC that McGregor is allowed to fight before the 6 months? Do you think this is good for UFC that they're moving away from USADA? Do you think USADA is a good organization, bad organization? Love to hear your thoughts about how this is impacting you, impacting the sport altogether. For MMA Roundup, my name is Randy Silver. Thank you for watching today. I hope I made you smarter, and if I did, let me know. Give me a like, give me a subscribe if I didn't. Tell me how I can improve. Always looking to get better and expand your mind. Thank you for watching. We'll keep you updated on more stories, and of course, subscribe here for all the MMA news. Randy out.